They lied to you. They told you vampires came from shadows, from folklore, from curses wrapped in superstition. But what if the first vampire came from light, before Dracula, before blood-soaked legends haunted the forests of Europe? There was a heavenly being, a watcher from the realms above, who fell not because he rebelled, but because he loved. A fallen angel who didn't thirst for power but for mercy. And that mercy cost him everything. This is not fiction. This is the hidden origin of the vampire, buried in the forbidden scrolls, echoed in ancient books like Enoch, veiled by time and fear. And yet it begins with something sacred, compassion. Why would an angel abandon eternity for a single human soul? Why has this story been hidden for centuries while the world feared creatures it never truly understood? And what happens when mercy turns into a curse? In this video, you will uncover the true mythology behind the first vampire. You'll discover a truth deeper than horror, the spiritual tragedy of a being named Saraphas, whose love defied the heavens and whose blood birthed a legacy misunderstood through generations. You'll see how the vampire wasn't created to destroy, but to preserve. You'll walk into the mystery of the Watchers, the children born between realms, the judgment of silent angels, and a prophecy that still waits to be fulfilled. This story is not about monsters. It's about the cost of compassion. It's about what happens when love becomes too powerful for even heaven to allow. It's about a broken angel who drank blood to save life, and in doing so, created a myth the world now fears. So stay with me, because once you hear this truth, you'll never see the night the same again. And if something in this story touches the part of you that's ever loved too deeply, if you've ever felt punished for your heart, if you've ever questioned whether mercy could become your downfall, let your voice be known in the comments, because your story might be more connected to this one than you realize. Like, share, subscribe, not just for the algorithm, but for the healing truth hidden in this curse. Because even in the blood, there is light. Even in the fall, there is purpose. Even in the night, there is redemption waiting to rise. The Watchers and the one who broke the law. He was not meant to feel. In the ancient silence of the heavens, where stars were named and destinies written by divine command, the Watchers were created, not to intervene, not to rescue, but to observe. They were the witnesses of humanity, the keepers of memory, the eyes of eternity watching from beyond the veil. They saw empires rise and crumble, hearts bloom and break, blood spill and generations suffer. And still, they said nothing. Because that was the law. Holy, unbreakable. Do not interfere. But not all angels were made of marble. He watched not just with vision, but with ache. He didn't look upon the world with cold detachment. He looked with sorrow, longing, a silent grief that burned behind every act of injustice, every innocent cry that echoed unanswered in the night. He had a name not recorded in any earthly scripture, not Lucifer, not Azazel, not even one of the infamous fallen. But his name carried weight in the air of heaven, because he was different. He was not cast out in rebellion. He was not drunk on pride. He broke the law, because he could not bear to see one more child die alone. It happened on the edge of winter, a village suffocated by plague. The sky dimmed with smoke and unspoken prayers. And there, beneath the weight of snow, a woman collapsed, cold, dying, forgotten. He hovered above, invisible, untouchable, torn between duty and mercy. The law screamed at him to turn away, but his spirit bled. She was not remarkable to the world, not a queen, not a prophet, just a mother, holding her final breath like a broken lullaby. but in that moment, she became the axis of his entire being. Because to him, even one soul mattered. Even one soul was worth breaking heaven for. And so, he did. He stepped into the physical, into time, into blood. The moment he reached for her, heaven screamed. A soundless roar through the cosmos, like glass shattering in eternity. He had touched what was forbidden. He had crossed the line between watcher and participant. But he didn't care. He held her, whispered warmth back into her bones, and carried her spirit back from the edge, not with light, but with sacrifice. Because heaven has many laws, but love has only one. Give everything. He was stripped of his rank, torn from his post among the stars, wings scorched by the fire of disobedience. And still, he wept not for himself, but for the ones he could no longer protect. They called him traitor. He called himself a witness of pain too deep to ignore. And in that fall, something awakened. A transformation not just of status, but of essence. His blood changed. His breath changed. The hunger began. This is not just a story about breaking divine law. This is a story about what happens when empathy becomes unbearable, when a divine being chooses compassion over command. It asks us, what would you sacrifice if you could save just one life? And maybe the better question is, what if the cost of mercy is your very nature? The woman in the snow, the price of one life. She was dying when he found her, alone, breath shallow, heartbeat fading into the rhythm of falling snow. Her skin was pale, not from beauty, but from the quiet theft of life slipping away, minute by minute, moment by moment. Her hands, once strong from tending fields and nursing children, now trembled like candlelight in a storm. He held her, but his hands were no longer made of light. He felt it, the fracture, the thirst, the unbearable paradox that to save her, he would have to give something that could never be undone. He could no longer call upon heaven's breath. He could no longer heal with divine will. He had only one gift left, his altered blood. It was not redemption. It was resurrection, laced with a curse. With trembling lips, he let her drink, and the snow turned red. She woke, not as before, but alive, changed. Her eyes carried both gratitude and horror because she had tasted eternity, and it was bitter. She had been saved, but not sanctified. He had stolen her from death, but at a cost heaven would never accept. And this is the question too few dare to ask. Is it truly salvation if it breaks every law to offer it? The heavens recoiled, creation tilted, and somewhere in the deeper realms, silence gave way to judgment, because the act of saving one life, in the wrong way, becomes a scream in eternity, a rebellion cloaked not in pride, but in love. This is the paradox of grace. Sometimes to give life, you must become the very thing heaven fears. The woman's name was never remembered, but her existence became the first ripple in a wave of sorrow. Because what was done for one could be done again. And in that moment, the world didn't gain a savior. It gained a warning. A being who would walk between realms, never fully divine, never fully mortal, cursed by compassion. So when you hear stories of vampires in the night, remember, one of them began as a savior in the snow, and sometimes even mercy draws blood. The child called Seraphas, born between heaven and earth. He was never supposed to be. Born of a forbidden union, conceived not through lust, but through a moment of desperate grace. A child born from the blood of a fallen angel and the breath of a dying woman, not quite human, not quite divine. They named him Saraphas. He cried not like other children, but with a sound that silenced birds and stirred the dust of ancient trees. His eyes glowed in the dark, not from evil, but from a light he could not contain. His presence caused animals to kneel. The winds whispered his name in languages long dead. He didn't belong. He aged, but not like men. He bled, but never truly healed. He hungered, not for food, but for something deeper, something spiritual. And every night he stood at the edge of humanity, asking a question no child should have to ask. Why am I alive if I was never meant to be born? He was not Nephilim, not entirely. The Watchers had children, yes, abominations of desire and pride. But Saraphas was different. His birth was an act of compassion, not rebellion. And that changed everything. He tried to live among men, to belong, to love. But his presence disturbed the order. He was a mirror that showed others their shame, their fragility, their fear. Children ran from him. Elders whispered, and he began to hide. In legends, we often speak of monsters as those who choose violence. But what if the first monster was created not by choice, but by rejection? Saraphas grew up watching others shun the very mercy that gave him life. And in doing so, he began to hate the gift he carried, his strength, his senses, his thirst. They weren't powers. They were punishments. He did not want to drink. But when hunger came, it was unbearable. And so the cycle began. Feed, regret, hide, weep, repeat. He wasn't evil. He was exiled by design. And every drop of blood he took was not an act of malice, but of survival. This is not just a story of mythology. It's a cry for those who feel born into the wrong world, for those whose very existence is a contradiction, for those who've tasted rejection before they understood belonging. Saraphas is the embodiment of every child who wonders if love is enough to undo the curse they never asked for. And maybe, just maybe, his story is the key to unlocking the truth behind why some of us feel so torn between heaven and earth. The question is no longer, what is he? It's, who are we if we are born of broken love? And as Saraphas takes his first steps into the world, the heavens whisper and tremble, not because of his power, but because his pain is divine. The curse of compassion. When mercy creates a monster. He didn't ask to be saved. He didn't ask to be born. But now he was here, caught between mercy and monstrosity, pulled in opposite directions by a love that gave him life, and a hunger that slowly stole it away. Saraphas, the child of compassion, became its cursed echo. Not because he was evil, but because he was too good for a world that never knew what to do with goodness wrapped in shadow. It started slowly. The first time his mother collapsed, weak from sickness, from starvation, from simply being human. He tried everything. Warmth, water, prayers. But none of it worked. She was fading, and the light in her eyes reminded him of the night she had been saved. The snow, the silence, the miracle. But this time, no angel came. So he became what he feared most. His hands trembled. His heart broke. He leaned in, and he drank. Not out of hatred, not out of bloodlust, but because he couldn't lose the one soul who had ever looked at him without fear. She gasped, eyes wide, and lived. But something changed inside her. The way she looked at him afterward, not with love, but with confusion, then terror, and then silence. He had become both savior and destroyer in the same breath. His mercy had kept her alive, and killed everything else. That night, he walked alone under the weight of his own decision. And for the first time, he asked the question that would haunt him for eternity. What if the most loving act is the one that scars the deepest? People think evil is born in rage, but sometimes it's born in compassion, unrestrained. The kind of love that refuses to let go, even when it should. That's the real danger. That's the unbearable truth. Mercy, when misplaced, creates monsters that never intended to exist. We see it everywhere, in real life. The parent who covers for their child too many times. The lover who forgives what should never be repeated. The soul who feeds others until they starve. We call it kindness. But is it? Or is it just fear wearing the mask of love? Seriphus didn't want to be feared. He wanted to belong. But now, every act of care turned into consequence. Every time he saved someone, he lost more of himself. His fangs were not weapons. They were symbols of grief, of choices made when the heart overruled heaven. And that's the lesson, isn't it? Love without boundaries becomes bondage. Compassion without consequence becomes corruption. And mercy, when unmeasured, becomes the very curse we tried to avoid. So tell me, have you ever loved someone so much it broke the rules? And if you did, was the price worth it? The hunger that could not be silenced. It was not just thirst, not just a craving. It was a holy ache, a divine rupture that began at the soul and echoed through every cell in his body. Seriphus didn't want to drink blood, but it called to him, not as temptation, but as necessity. His hunger was not carnal, it was cosmic. He could feel it rise beneath his skin, like waves against stone, slow at first, then violent, then impossible to deny. He tried fasting, praying, isolation. He buried himself in ancient texts, hoping to find a way to purge the appetite. But nothing worked, because this hunger wasn't for food. It was for life force, for connection, for essence, for light. And the longer he denied it, the more it twisted him. His hands shook, his vision blurred, his voice became a whisper of pain, until finally, he couldn't resist. And when he fed, not to kill, but to survive, he felt something no being should ever feel. Relief and shame fused as one. He had become the very thing he feared, a creature who needed others to live. But he was not like the others, not like Dracula, whose hunger was built on dominance, not like Nosferatu, whose gaze promised death. Seriphus wept after every feeding. He whispered prayers. He buried his victims with honor. He begged for forgiveness from skies that never answered. His hunger was the shattered mirror of grace. Not sin, but the distortion of something once holy. And yet, isn't that the story of every human soul? We all hunger for love, for worth, for meaning. And sometimes we take more than we should. We call it ambition, survival, justification. But underneath, it's the same. A cry for something eternal in a world that only offers temporary relief. Seriphus became a symbol, not of evil, but of what happens when the divine is forced to survive in the flesh, when purity is caged in corruption, when the heart still wants heaven, but the body betrays it with every breath. There is no enemy more painful than the one inside us. And maybe that's the curse we all carry, to hunger for something more than this world can give, and to never be sure if feeding that hunger will save us or destroy us. So ask yourself, what are you starving for? And what would you sacrifice, just to feel whole again? The silent angels and the judgment yet to come. They watched him, unmoving, unblinking, eyes like frozen stars, piercing, timeless, terrifying. They did not descend with swords, they did not speak with thunder, they simply stood, watching, judging. Seraphus could feel their presence long before he saw them, a cold pressure in the air, a stillness too heavy to be natural. Heaven had sent them, not to redeem, not to rescue, but to record. They were not messengers. They were witnesses, silent scribes of heaven's justice. He begged them to speak. He fell to his knees, screamed into the night, asked if there was still hope, if the Father still saw his heart. But they said nothing, and in that silence, Seraphus understood something more horrifying than wrath. Heaven wasn't punishing him. Heaven was waiting. There was still a prophecy, a future not yet written. And he, broken, bleeding, starving, was part of it. He was not just a mistake. He was a thread in the divine plan, stretched thin, trembling under the weight of eternity. But what kind of plan requires this much pain? The angel's silence wasn't rejection, it was tension. A divine breath held just a moment longer, as if the universe itself was asking, what will he become? Seraphus, once a being of radiant mercy, now stood on the edge of judgment, not from wrath, but from watchfulness. And sometimes being watched is a heavier burden than being condemned. Their silence became his mirror. Every act, every decision, every slip into hunger, every glimmer of hope. He felt their eyes on him, not to shame, but to remind. That his story was still being written, that heaven hadn't forgotten. It was waiting for the final sentence. And maybe, just maybe, for redemption. This is what most of us miss. Judgment doesn't always come with fire. Sometimes it comes with silence, with space, with the terrifying freedom to choose. And that's where we either rise or fall. So now we look at Seraphus not with fear, but with reflection. Because the question is not, will he be judged? The real question is, when judgment comes for you, will you be ready? And what story will the silent angels write in your name? The prophecy of the oracle. When the first blood shall drink the light. It was not whispered, it was carved, etched into obsidian stone in a forgotten cave beneath a sacred mountain, long before men could write, long before the flood washed clean the memory of fallen things. A prophecy was spoken, not by man, not by angel, but by one called the oracle, a being neither of heaven nor earth, who saw not with eyes but with time. The prophecy read, "From his bloodline one shall walk into heaven with blood on his hands, and the light of the unborn shall become his flame." The watchers feared it. The angels sealed it. Humanity forgot it. But Seraphus carried it in his veins. Every time he fed, every time his hunger overtook his prayer, he felt something stir. Not evil, but potential. A divine energy hidden beneath the curse. As if his blood knew its own ending, even if he didn't. As if he was not just surviving, but preparing. The oracle had spoken of the first blood, the one whose existence would split the realms, the one who drank not from wrath, but from love, and Seraphus fit the words like a blade fits its sheath. But what did it mean to drink the light of a child unborn? Some said it spoke of sacrifice. Others believed it meant the birth of a redeemer through his line. But Seraphus feared it meant destruction, that in his attempt to save, he would destroy the very innocence he longed to protect. He searched for the oracle, traveled across desolate plains, ancient ruins, the borders of the spiritual and physical. Until one night she came to him, eyes glowing, voice like wind between tombs. "You were not made to live," she said. "You were made to fulfill." He begged for more, but she vanished. That's the agony of prophecy. It reveals enough to stir the soul, but not enough to ease it. And in the silence that followed, Seraphus understood. The prophecy was not about fate. It was about choice. He could become the bringer of redemption, or the one who would bathe heaven in blood. And now every step he takes echoes with consequence, because the prophecy is still alive, still waiting, still unfolding. And if your soul is trembling right now, it's because you, too, were born into a world that expects something sacred from your scars. So what do you believe? Can something cursed give birth to something holy? Can blood, once defiled, become the cup of salvation? Vampires, the misunderstood legacy of a father's love. They feared him, but they feared his children more. For from the line of Saraphas came others, not born, but changed. Not chosen, but caught in the sacred curse. Some drank to survive, others drank to dominate. But all of them carried the echo of that first act of mercy. They were called vampires, demons, shadows. But they were something far more complicated. The living record of a father's grief. Saraphas didn't want followers. He wanted forgiveness. But as he wandered through centuries, those he saved, or cursed, multiplied. And with each new soul, the myth grew and warped. Some of his descendants turned violent, hungry for power. They believed themselves damned, so they acted like it. They fed without conscience, loved without loyalty, built kingdoms in the shadows of cathedrals, and drank from the veins of priests. Others sought peace. They hid. They fasted. They walked beside humanity, carrying their sorrow in silence. But even these were hunted, because once you carry the blood, the world decides who you are, not based on truth, but on fear. Saraphas wept for them, not because they were monsters, but because they didn't know they were born from love. He left them messages, symbols on trees, markings in ruins, whispered warnings in dreams. You were not born evil. But few listened, and isn't that the tragedy of inheritance? That what we pass down is not just blood, but belief, that we often receive a legacy of pain and mistake it for identity. You don't have to drink blood to understand this. Many of us are carrying the consequences of someone else's mercy. Many of us are living stories that began before we were born. But here's the truth. You are not bound to the shadow. You are not cursed beyond redemption. You are not what they call you. You are what you choose to become. And if Saraphas, the first of your kind, can still weep for you, then maybe, just maybe, there's still hope in your lineage. So let this message find those who need it. You are more than what you hunger for. And the legacy of love always has the final word. The Weeping Father, a legacy of sorrow and hope. He stood on the cliffs of time, watching cities rise and fall, empires burn, lovers die, and children scream into the wind, always just out of reach. Saraphas had become more than a legend. He was a wound in the story of the world that never fully healed. They called him Father of Vampires, Lord of Night. But he never wore a crown. He never ruled. He wandered, weeping. Because what is a father if not the one who carries the regret no one else will? He remembered every face, every soul he changed, every heartbeat he interrupted, and not one of them left his memory. Their names carved themselves into his soul like sacred scripture. Adam was the first man. But Saraphas was the first mistake that felt, that's the difference. Adam fell from Eden through disobedience, but Saraphas fell through empathy, and that made his sorrow deeper, more human, more holy. Because when you fall out of love, not rebellion, you never stop bleeding. He sat beneath trees whose roots touched ancient bones. He watched stars blink out of existence, And still, he whispered prayers, not for himself, but for his children, that they might know peace, that they might find the mercy he could no longer touch. And every time a vampire wept, it echoed back to him, across realms, across time, across blood, because sorrow has a frequency, and it always finds its source. But even in his pain, Seriphus believed, not in religion, not in forgiveness, but in hope, that maybe one day, someone from his line would do what he could not. Walk into the light, redeem the blood. That's the real story of vampires. Not of horror, not of death, but of a father who dared to love too much and paid the price for eternity. So if your story feels broken, if you feel like a mistake too ancient to fix, let Seriphus remind you, the one who weeps for you is still praying for your redemption. And maybe, just maybe, that's enough. Will redemption ever come? The prophetic endgame. There is a moment that hasn't come yet, a silence that still stretches across eternity like breath held in anticipation. The prophecy spoke of a child, not born of flesh, but of legacy, one who would carry the blood of Seriphus and walk into the gates of heaven, stained, trembling, but chosen, not cleansed, not perfect, but redeemed. The angels are waiting. The watchers have recorded. Even the oracle has gone silent, because all of heaven leans forward in suspense. The great drama is reaching its final act, and the question remains, will the blood that began in mercy finally fulfill its purpose in glory? Seriphus doesn't know. He has wandered for millennia, searching for the one, watching every generation, whispering to the few who still dream strange dreams or wake with unexplained sorrow in their bones. Maybe it's you. Maybe that's why you're here, drawn to a story about vampires, angels, and broken love. Maybe something inside you remembers what your mind has forgotten, that you were born not just to survive, but to complete something older than history. Because redemption is not given, it's chosen. It's walked into, with trembling hands and open wounds. And if the end is coming, then let it come not with fear, but with fire. Let the cursed rise, let the blood speak. Let the one who carries the weight of 1,000 sorrows step forward and say, I am not perfect, but I am not lost, and I will not let mercy die. So now, the heavens wait, not with wrath, but with tears. And the question remains, will you be the one who turns the curse into light? And so, the story lingers, not just in the shadows of ancient lore, not only in the blood-soaked myths we whisper in fear, but in the spaces between your own heartbeat. Maybe you came here expecting a tale of darkness, a vampire fantasy, a fallen angel turned monster. But what you found was something deeper. You found yourself reflected in his hunger, echoed in his sorrow, mirrored in his mercy. Because we all carry something cursed inside us, a choice we regret, a moment we fell, a love we couldn't save. And yet, we're still here, breathing, searching, reaching for a redemption that feels too far, too impossible, too divine for broken hands to hold. But that's the secret heaven never shouted, the truth they sealed behind prophecy and flame. Redemption was never meant for the perfect. It was made for the weary, the wild, the wounded. It was written for the Seriphus inside all of us, the ones who dared to love too deeply, even when it broke the rules. You are not here by accident. Somewhere along the path of your life you heard a silent calling, a voice not of thunder, but of ache. Something in your soul recognized the hunger, the silence, the fall, the fire. And that recognition, that divine remembering, is sacred. This story is not just his. It's ours. It's every soul that's ever tried to turn pain into purpose, that's ever stood between heaven and hell, unsure where they belonged. It's every child who inherited a legacy they didn't ask for. Every father who wept for the harm he never meant to cause. Every person who loved so hard they burned themselves. And in the end, it's not the blood that defines you, it's what you do with it. The world may call you cursed. Your past may echo with mistakes. Your lineage may carry battles no one else sees. But hear this, clearly, deeply, undeniably. You are not lost. You are becoming light, even if your path began in shadow. There is power in your hunger, holiness in your ache, divinity in your brokenness. And like Seraphus, you are not beyond redemption. You are walking it, breathing it, writing it with every choice you make to keep going. So if this story stirred something in you, if it helped you see your scars as sacred or your tears as testimony, I invite you from the quietest part of my soul to leave a sign that you're still with me. A comment, a whisper, a story of your own. Your voice matters more than you know. You are part of this unfolding mystery, and your presence here is light in the darkness. If this video brought healing to you or reminded you of your worth when the world made you feel small, I gently invite you to send back a little of that light, whether by a like, a share, or simply subscribing to stay with me as we walk through more of these sacred stories together. And if your heart feels called to support this journey, not out of pressure but love, know that every drop of energy you offer helps breathe life into future videos like this. Every bit of encouragement, no matter how small, is a gift I carry with both hands and a grateful heart. This channel is more than content. It's a sanctuary for seekers, for questioners, for the quiet warriors of spirit who walk through this world craving something real. And together, we are building something eternal, not in numbers or views, but in truth that heals and holds. Thank you for listening with your heart. Thank you for staying through the silence. Thank you for remembering that even fallen angels still carry pieces of heaven inside them. And when you look in the mirror tonight, may you no longer see just skin and history. May you see legacy. May you see mercy. May you see light, rising from the bloodline you thought would ruin you. Because maybe, just maybe, you were never the curse. You were always the prophecy, and it's only just beginning.